Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to this week's topic. This week's topic is what you don't know can hurt you: dating, relationships, and time travel. And I was writing about this conversation that I go through in my own brain much of the time, several times a week, where I think about how great it would be if I could time travel, if I could go back in time and be there with my younger self to create either like backup in certain situations during certain events, or pull her aside and have a real heart to heart about decisions and life and relationships and what a healthy, thriving, happy relationship consists of, looks like, feels like. Or maybe change the course of certain events, like really talk about, listen, you're going down this path and it isn't going to end well. And so part of me wishes I could go back and have those conversations and create that support for myself. And if you've been following along, from week to week, it's been I really wanted to share some of the harder parts of my childhood, because I want to make it really clear that no matter what it is that you're coming out of, there's always the potential to grow from those experiences, to heal, and to create just a life that you love, and to experience a lot of genuine joy and fulfillment and satisfaction. Those things are all possible no matter what you are, whatever you grew in, right? The lotus flower is such a powerful symbol because it's like this flower that grows in mud and muck, and yet it sustains and it keeps growing toward the light, and eventually when it comes out of all of that mud and muck, it's this beautiful, gorgeous flower. It's a very it's a symbol in not just in yoga practice, but in many sort of spiritual healing practices. The lotus flower is that symbol of like, hang in there, and believe that just because maybe people didn't show up for you the way that you deserved and would have liked, it doesn't mean you're broken or you can't recover from that. And that's one of the reasons that I've really wanted to be so open about different aspects of my childhood, to reassure you. And listen, there are people who have lived through way worse, so definitely to keep those things in perspective. But it's all relative. We're all only going to have the one childhood that we get, and we have the primary caregivers that we had, and the things happened the way that they happened. And so that's the kind of like life stuff, right? The material that we are working with, and whatever it is for you is whatever it is for you. And other people have other things. It is certainly not a level playing field, and always good to remember that when you are maybe dealing with someone who is behaving in a way that's hard to understand. We never know what people are going through and what they're coming out of and what they're grappling with. We just don't know. So I do really try to extend the benefit of the doubt, and that is why I've been so transparent about some of these things some of them have been really hard to talk about and hard to write about. But I think that it's important to bring these things into the light. This week I felt myself like a need to just like go a little bit lighter, and write about way later, like life now. so that there is that reassurance that, maybe, I don't know where, depending on who is listening, right, where people might be on that journey toward peace, feeling at ease in your own skin, feeling, like you have a life that you love, not sure where on the spectrum you are on that. And so it's just good to know that, like, you can, there's the stuff that happens when we're growing, and that is the soil or the mud, however you want to think about it, that we are sort of marinating in as we're growing. And there are all these different, just like in yoga, there are lots of different schools of thought and different practices. The same thing in psychology, there are different schools of thought on things, but pretty common amongst most schools of thought that our personalities have developed pretty incredibly by the time we're 5. And so those first 5 years of life are, there's no doubt, really, really important and relevant if you're struggling later, to kind of think back to what happened. Like, what did I learn about myself and my place in this world and my value? Were my feelings, did they matter? If I was sad, did somebody stop and check in with me and ask me, what was going on, why I was feeling sad? Or was I told not to be sad? Did I learn that if I had feelings that were difficult for the grown-ups around me to deal with, did they just basically tell me, like, don't be sad, don't be scared, don't be angry? What happened as I was growing? What was I learning? What was I taught about all of that, about what it means to be a human being, about what it means for me personally, where I fit in the scheme of things, and just about my value, the roles that I played, and all of those things. Really useful to look back on that. And attachment styles, to know what your attachment style is, which is largely based on your experiences when you arrived here. Did you feel safe and secure and loved most of the time, and certainly by your primary caregivers? Did you feel like they had your back and they loved you more than anything, and they would be there for you, and they were there for you? Did you have that experience? Was it consistent? Were your feelings acknowledged and respected and received? Like, what happened? Or were you in an environment where you never knew what to expect? Sometimes you were received with love, and sometimes it was not like that, or you had a lot of uncertainty about what was going to happen. And if you are like me and you grew up in an alcoholic household, or you grew up in a household where you had to really keep secrets, then you probably experienced disorganized attachment, not really knowing what insecure attachment, right? Not knowing what might happen next, and if you were safe, and if you were loved unconditionally or not. And some of us grew up learning that love was very conditional. It's like, I love you as long as you do all the things I want you to do. And if you don't do the things that I want you to do, or you don't look the way that I need you to look, or you don't say the things that I need you to say, love can be withdrawn. If you don't pursue the line of study I want you to pursue, love can be withdrawn. So it's just really good to understand yourself. And that is a part of the yoga practice, but it's really part of if you want to heal, you have to know what what is happening with you. And svadhyaya is what we call it in yoga, self-study, enough that you understand what's driving you, what's scaring you, what's stopping you, what's motivating you, what lights you up. And so I can tell you for myself, and this is what I was writing about this week, when I left the chaos, really, of my childhood and my teenage years, I went out into the world, as we all do, and I started to forge my own relationships. And what happens for everyone that I know, and everyone I've ever worked with, and every friend I've ever had, is whatever your stuff is, whatever your doubts are, whatever your fears are, you're going to play that stuff out in your romantic relationships. That is where your intimate relationships, sometimes even familial relationships, can be incredibly triggering. And a lot of the time, my mother used to be able to push my buttons like no one else, and that's because she set up the motherboard. She knew exactly how to what little strings to pull and what things to push to send me spinning. And I had to do a lot of work over the years on boundaries and on techniques and tools to stay steady so that no matter what she said or did, it wasn't going to throw me off my game. And I mean, that took years. It took years for me to get to a place. And it still, by the way, would hurt even later in life, but it didn't derail me in the ways that it did when I was a teenager and a young adult, and even a not, an adult. It was still tough, even in my 30s. She could still do a number on me, and I really, that is kind of when I started to, after I had my own kids, I did not want to be at the mercy of that stuff. And so that's been, some of my life's work and some of my healing work really has been around boundaries and tools to stay on track no matter what is happening around me or what anybody else says or does. You don't want to be a victim of circumstance. You don't want to be so like an open wound to somebody else's like ability to just stick a knife in. You want to be able to defend and protect your tender heart. And so when you go out you start having these relationships with people, whether it is there's your family, of course, but romantic relationships is where we tend to play out all the stuff that we didn't heal in our childhood. So if you have incredible self-doubt, for example, it's not like you're gonna meet someone and suddenly that's just gonna fly out the door. Here's the thing that happens for a lot of people. For the first 3 months of most relationships, it will fly out the door, because there's lust flying all over the place. And, that feeling of, this is it, and I finally met this person. And you can feel, it's like a drug, you can feel incredible for the first 3 months of most relationships. Then reality starts to sink in and the lust dust, as I like to call it, clears, and you start to get to know, who is this person? Who is this person really? When my hormones aren't sort of clouding my vision, what am I working with here? Like what's happening? And that's usually when things start to get interesting, and for both people. And so whatever your vulnerabilities are, whatever your fears are, whatever your doubts are, that stuff starts to rise to the surface. Now, for me personally, and maybe for you too, my big things were a huge fear of abandonment. That was like a huge, huge driving force. And a lot of self-doubt, this feeling that I was somehow at my very core, where no one could see it, broken and unlovable. That is what I thought as a, sort of older teenager, young adult person. Those are two sort of deeply held beliefs that I had. And I didn't think you could trust anyone, because I had grown up with the dad that I had, who was, lying to all the women in his life all the time, cheating, and bringing me along on those dates so I would have a front row seat to that stuff, and then going home to my stepmom and being quiet when she would ask what we had done, and allowing him to say we were at the playground, just being quiet, because I didn't want her feelings to be hurt. I had taken that on along with him. He made me, his wing child. And so I had all that stuff going into relationships. So a lot of fear. And when you have a lot of fear, you are certainly not going to just relax and be yourself and let the person get to know you. You're working. You're working, right? And the job is, how do I not get left? And how do I not allow these cracks in my armor to show in a way that's going to be unattractive? Like I remember doing a lot of work to seem like I had no needs, and to be easy, to be perfect. Like, what does this person need, And I also grew up listening to a grown man talk to me about his problems. So I don't think my dad intended to do this, but he groomed me for, older men with problems. Like, that is what I grew up understanding. And so that's what felt like home to me. So if an older man had, needed help, needed to be saved, needed someone to love him, I was like, oh, listen, let me sign up for that job. I'm here. I know how to do this. And none of these things were conscious. This is like all the stuff that was going on underneath the surface. This is the stuff that we all need to, at a certain point, bring into the light. Otherwise, we keep repeating the pattern again and again. And you keep finding yourself in these relationships where you end up crashing into a brick wall. And at a certain point, you've got to figure out, okay, wait a second, like, this can't be a coincidence, right? If every relationship I have ends up with me like wildly hurt, I've got to check in with who I'm inviting into my inner circle here, like who am I gravitating toward, and why is that? And I've talked about, there's the Freud was a weird dude. There's a lot of things going on there if you dig into it. So I'm always careful when I sort of talk about anyone as an expert on anything to make sure we all understand everyone is just a human being, including Freud, including Gandhi, including Martin Luther King Jr. Everyone is just a human being. Human beings are flawed, all of us, every single one of us. So, but Freud, opium, like a lot of some strange ideas about sexuality. So there's that. But he had this study that he did, and it was all about the pleasure principle and how he thought his patients would be more drawn to the things that were going to be pleasurable and make them happy than they would be toward sort of like repeating patterns. That whole idea of like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again and expecting a different outcome, which is usually attributed to Albert Einstein. But Freud was observing something called the repetition compulsion. And the repetition compulsion was this thing that he was seeing where his patients were more compelled to repeat an old pattern than they were to seek pleasure. So I said that in a lot of words, but that's the main idea there. He was shocked to discover his patients were more compelled to repeat patterns than they were to seek pleasure. And what is that? That is a grown person trying to heal a childhood wound in the present. So if I didn't get love and affection and security and feel safe as a child, I'm going to seek that out in my adult relationships because it's an old wound that I'm trying to rewrite history and get my happy ending. And what happens when we do that is we just end up compounding the pain, because in order to rewrite history and get a different ending, you've got to seek out that same dynamic that feels like home. So what does that look like? If you are somebody with insecure attachment, which I certainly was in my 20s, you are probably going to gravitate toward people who are afraid of intimacy, who are unavailable in some way or another, because that feels like home to you. I could never get my mother's approval. I felt like I never really had her attention. I was always chasing. I just wanted her to love me, And so if I was getting those messages from a man, I was like, oh, this feels like home. So I'm going to this is the one to sort of get in there and try to, if I could just get this person to love me, then I'll feel lovable. It never works, because you are choosing someone who is incapable of giving you the thing that you're looking for. Again, it's not conscious. It's just there's something, your psyche and all of it, your whole being is like, oh yeah, this really feels like home. This unavailable, can't quite, get this person's approval or attention or love or feel secure with them. I know this feeling, so this must be it. I must be in love. No, you're not in love. You are hooked on something that feels like home. And, if home wasn't so great, you probably want to be running in the other direction, but that's not what people tend to do. And so they play it out. And then what happens is, unfortunately, it doesn't work out. You end up crashing into that brick wall, and whatever your initial feelings were, like everyone leaves or everyone cheats or you can't trust anyone, you just added to that story. You just added another layer to, solidify a belief that you had going in. And you think that it means the external world has now confirmed for you something that you were afraid of to begin with. But really, what it is you've just sought out someone unconsciously or gravitated towards someone unconsciously who was going to help you prove your own hypothesis. Your thoughts and your feelings and the stories that you tell yourself, your ideas about all these things have polluted the experiment. You've just chosen the wrong subject, basically. So I did a lot of that. Not a lot, but that is the same thing that happened to me in the important relationships that I had in my 20s. So it doesn't take too many for you to feel absolutely horrible. And the first kind of my high school boyfriend was great. He was a wonderful guy. We had a great, healthy, I just kind of lucked out, just fell into that. It was great. But then he left and went to college, as people do, right? And he had a plan to go to Wisconsin before we started dating. We both grew up in New York. And so he went to Wisconsin and I stayed in New York and went to Columbia. And the fact that he left me triggered a whole bunch of feelings in me that, even though rationally I could say to myself, well, of course this is where he got accepted. This is where he wanted to go and he's going. I didn't matter. It was that old, I've been left, I've been abandoned kind of stuff. And a bunch of other things happened to, be fair, over time, as these things do. Long distance relationships are really hard, and he hit the ground running, and he had friends there from his high school. He just was he was great. He was doing great. He was happy. And I was up at Columbia, and I had all my friends were doing their senior year at high school, so I was by myself. I felt intimidated. I did not have, great self-esteem. I was pretty anxious in social situations, which was often interpreted as me being aloof, but it really was not that. It was just a real discomfort and inability to sort of break through and be like, hi, I was not who I am now. Then I was a different version of myself, a much more fearful, shy, insecure, incredibly loud inner critic in my head all the time. That was the situation. So I'm up at school and I don't know anyone. I was not okay. I was not feeling great. And this older man just kind of swooped in, and he had his eye on me before. I was working at one of his restaurants, and he had asked me out multiple times, but I said, I have a boyfriend. You're too old for me. I have a boyfriend. No. He just kept at it. And that is a relationship that I ended up being in for most of college, for 3 years. And that man was 20 years older, and same age difference between my mom and my dad. My mom and my dad had 19 years between them, and I outdid them by a year. And this man, honestly, if you had put my parents in a blender, and popped out a human being, it was this guy. And just unavailable, critical, not, just not, and rampant womanizer. Just all the things that were my worst fears realized in one human being. And I walked into that fire yep, I can do it. I know how to do this. I know how to help. And if I can just get this guy to love me and be faithful to me, I'm going to feel better. And I'm going to save him from himself, and from this life that he's living that's clearly he's not happy. And he's hurt, and it's his own insecurities and it's his own fears, and I can get in there with him and really help. I know how to do this. And that's really what I thought. I thought if I could just love him enough, then he could get out of his own way and have something wonderful in his life. And I hung in there 3 years, and it was, I'm lucky that I made it out alive, and I'm not exaggerating. I'm lucky that I made it out alive. I almost didn't. I got as low as you could possibly get when it ended. He finally, pushed me to a place where there was no choice but to end it. But by the time I got there, I was so deeply, wildly hurt. It was just sheer will. And I think this kind of lifelong optimism that I've had that kept me alive. And it happens to be when I found yoga. That also really saved my life in many, many ways. I'd been in therapy for off and on since I was 13, so that was not new to me to think about like all those things. I could recognize in retrospect why I had been so pulled into that situation, what it was that kept me there, even though he was treating me terribly, breaking my heart like all the time on a regular basis. I'd end up like under the kitchen table at the apartment just sobbing and like holding on to myself regularly. I mean, he just was really, I don't look back on him kindly. Like I have to say that I really have a different feeling than I did at 17, 18 about a man 20 years older going after a girl at that age. It is really like not okay at all and pretty disgusting and predatory. So that really strong feelings about that, because you just don't know yourself at 17, 18. It doesn't matter if 18 is like legal. You don't know yourself. So you might, like, the person maybe won't go to jail for it, but you're not going to win any awards for being a good person. Just like, no, just try to swim in waters with people closer to your own age. Pick on someone your own size, that idea. So anyway, I'm sharing that with you because it's so important to understand what is pulling on you in relationships, what is attracting you to certain people, especially if you have had your heart broken again and again. In yoga, when we like repeat patterns, it's called samskaras, joined action, samskara. Like you keep doing the same thing over and over again, hoping you're going to get a different result, the repetition compulsion, or the definition of insanity, right? Like it's if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're going to keep getting what you've been getting. It's that whole thing there that so many different wonderful teachers have come to the same conclusion. So you got to figure out why, like what is happening for me and what is it that I'm trying to heal, because you're not going to heal it that way. And there's Sylvia Boorstein, one of my favorite meditation teachers, wonderful writer. She's got a book called Happiness is an Inside Job, one of my favorite books. And that's the reality. Happiness is an inside job. You are not going to heal those, what I tend to call original wounds. You're not going to heal them by playing it out, in your present with someone who isn't going to be able to do anything except hurt you again. That isn't how you're going to do it. You got to do it with yourself. And the first step of healing it is consciously realizing, oh, wait a second. There's something in me that thinks I am broken and unlovable, like at my core. And for me, I felt that way because I thought, well, my own mother couldn't love me. So no matter how things might look or how things might seem, or how smart I might be or whatever it is, like I'm actually like deeply, where no one can see it, unlovable and broken. And the other thing is, I knew it was not attractive to be jealous. I knew that was not like an attractive quality. So I worked really hard to seem like I didn't need anything. I wasn't bothered. I was never insecure. Like I put on a really good front. But I was always afraid, always insecure, always feeling like not enough, not pretty enough, not thin enough, not smart enough, not anything enough. And always on the lookout for like, where's the threat coming from? Like what is going to happen that's going to cause me to be left? So there's all this stuff going on. And meanwhile, I'm trying to act like this really independent gal who doesn't need anything and doesn't want anything and is just there for you. I'm just here for you, like what can I do for you and how can we make it about you? Because I thought, well, if I make myself indispensable and I'm really generous and loving and kind and loyal and I keep showing up and I give this person everything I've got, of course they won't leave me. Why would they leave me? I'm doing everything they want and I'm being everything they want me to be. Whatever version of myself they need, I'm showing up with it. So I'm safe. Well, you're not safe. You're, first of all, you're not even yourself. I don't even know, you're just some, like, you're sending in your, like, weird ambassador who's, like, parts of you, you know, but you're never relaxed. You're never really, like, letting yourself just be you and see, if this is a good fit. Like, that's never happening. And you are, it's all about this other person and what they need and what they want. You're not even thinking about, am I having a good time? Like, am I enjoying this? Like, is this fun for me or fulfilling for me or interesting or, I don't know, inspiring? Like, am I growing from this? What about me? That just is not even occurring to you in this scenario that I'm describing of, like, just giant fear of abandonment and no trust, thinking everyone leaves. Like, that's what's driving you, is fear. And if fear is driving your bus, you're headed toward a brick wall. In a relationship, if that is the driving force, it's not going to end well. It's not going to, it's not going to be pretty. So, at a certain point, you've got to really take stock and figure out, what am I trying to heal? And then get busy working on that. And that is really what I did. And it took, I mean, I'm doing the math right now, but I met my husband when I was 45. I think that's right. And, like, I wasn't ready. I don't know, I just was not in that place of knowing my worth prior to that. I think that all the things I went through in my 20s and 30s and through my divorce, which was the kind of the pinnacle of everything I didn't want to happen. Like, I had spent my whole adult life trying to create a happy family. Like, that is what I was trying to figure out. And honestly, sometimes I would see families on the street and I would think, like, how are they doing it? Like, how did they do that? Really? If I could have gone up and been like, hey, I know this is super weird. Can you guys just, like, could you give me, like, half an hour and just talk to me about how you did this? Like, whatever this is, where you look, from the outside like you're happy and you've got these babies with you. Like, how do you do that? Because I didn't know. I didn't have a model for that. There were no marriages in my life that I could really look at and say, that's the one. Like, that's what I want. I didn't have that. And so I really was like a detective in a way, trying to figure out, how do you do that? And when it became clear, and I'm not going to go into much detail about this, but in my first marriage, I will just say that the last thing I wanted was to have my kids have to live through a divorce. Like, that is the last thing that I wanted. And I did everything in my power to try to avoid that outcome. I bent over backwards. I tried as hard as I could to not have that happen. I did not want that for them. I didn't want it for me, but I especially didn't want it for them. I didn't want it for any of us. It was rough. And all I could think of was, I know what divorce is, right? Like, it's what I lived through. It's what I grew up with. And I will have my soul crushed before I will put my kids through that. Like, that's where I was, And one day I realized there are many ways to do a divorce. It does not have to be what I grew up with. There are other ways to do it, where you put the kids first. And once I realized that, once I understood there's another path forward here, it was a gift for all four of us. It was a gift. Because ultimately, I wanted my children to grow up in a happy house. Ultimately, that is what I wanted. I wanted them to be surrounded by love and peace and security and joy and laughter and playtime. Like, that is what I wanted for them. And that is what they got, And that's the way they got it. And so even though I, at the time, was beside myself and so heartbroken, and it was the last thing I wanted, it ended up being really the best thing for everyone in that situation by far. And I think that that was a moment where I really had to reckon with, okay, like what happened, like let me look at my own participation in this situation and how it ended up here. This thing that I didn't want most of all, like what happened? Where were the red flags that I walked by? And this is part of what I think happens for people, especially if you want babies. And not everyone wants babies. So, and great. That's how I feel about that. It's like, you might want them. If you want them, great. If you don't want them, don't have them, because it's really hard. It's a lot of giving, for a long time for the rest of your life. And so, definitely if you don't want them, don't have them, and more power to you. If you want them, what tends to happen for especially women at a certain age is that biological clock, people know that term for a reason. If you want those babies and you want that, that's what you're thinking, you're going to start, no matter what gender you prefer, right? You're going to start figuring out, how do I do that? How do I do that? Like, whether you're doing it with a partner of the opposite sex or you're doing it in a same-sex situation, you're going to figure out, like, how do I make this happen, right? What tends to happen for people, if that is driving them, is a lot of the time they're going to be willing to overlook some red flags, because there's this biological drive to like make this family. And it might not just be biological, it might also be, for me, psychological. Like, I really, really wanted the happy family. I thought, if I could just create that, like, that would be the most amazing thing in the world. And so when you're in that mind space, and you've found someone and there's a lot of good things there, you might be overlooking some of the things that are like, this is not something you want to be overlooking. A lot of things can kind of blind us, but that's a big one for people. That's a big one. That's a big driving thing for people. And even if it's not about babies, even if it's just, I want a partner, I want a life partner. I'm getting to a certain age. Maybe it's like you've pursued your career stuff, you're on your way, you kind of have a picture of like where your life is going. Maybe not, but for, some people at that age, they've sort of figured that part out, and they're looking for some companionship and for some romance and for some love and some comfort. Those are normal things to desire for all of us. It's okay. It's like, it's normal to want that connection. You don't have to get it through a romantic partner, but for many people, that is what they want. They want a life partner. And so when that's driving you, it can blind you, or you're not blinded, but you're like, yeah, I see that. I think we can get through it. I think we can overcome that, or I can live with that. That'll be okay. Or, ooh, this seems like really not okay, but like, it'll be all right. Like, we don't have the self-worth, self-esteem, self-knowledge yet to be realizing like, yeah, I probably can't live with that, or that's probably not going to be okay for me, or that's a giant red flag that's going to be a deal breaker for me. Like, you can talk yourself into a lot of things when you are desperately wanting something. You can kind of talk yourself, you can do those mental gymnastics to tell yourself it's going to be okay, or to say to yourself, you know what, I'm just going to, if I love this person enough, we can get through that. It'll be all right. Well, one of the things that I understood, and I'm very consciously trying to talk about all of us, not just my own situation. This is for so many people of a certain age where they're starting to look for that person, right? Sometimes when that all falls apart, you're at a different place. And for me, for example, like after my divorce, I already had the kids. I had the kids, I had work that I loved, And I just was like, if I am, and I understood my own participation. I could look back and see how I had participated and in what ways, maybe there were some red flags that I walked by, and a lot of old patterns. And I think that I think a lot of us sometimes we're like thinking. I knew, for example, I don't want to marry my dad. I got to make sure, that I marry someone who knows how to be faithful and loyal. You don't always think about the whole picture, like you don't want to marry your mom or your dad, probably. Like, I mean, unless you got real lucky and your experiences as a small child were all positive, loving, just wonderful. And some people do, they hit the jackpot in the parents department. And I mean, my gosh, celebrate that. Like, if you got two great, loving, consistent parents who were like so excited to have you and just thought you were like the best thing ever, that is a blessing and a gift, and I hope you celebrate it all the time. But a lot of people didn't get that, so you just got to kind of like figure out what you did have, and then be on the lookout. Make sure you're not sort of consciously or unconsciously, but obviously if it's unconscious you don't realize, but be on the lookout and try to make sure that you're not gravitating towards something that feels familiar and not a good way, right? In a way that could possibly be really painful for you. When you come out of the other side, and that for me is, not everybody, obviously there are a lot of people who may be listening who will never be dating post-divorce, right? Either they never got married, or they got married and stayed married, or whatever. But for those of you in that category, or for those of you who never got married but you just reached a point in time where you were like, I know myself now, and I know what I'm going to tolerate, not tolerate, right? It's different. You're older and you know more about yourself and about life than you did in your 20s. And that is one of the most wonderful things about getting older, is you keep learning. I would not go back to my 25-year-old. Like, I wouldn't, sometimes, I wish I could be 25 again. No, I do not. It was not a good time. It was not. Like, no. I wouldn't mind having coffee with her, but I feel like I would really like to do that, but I would not want to go back and relive that. It was not fun. And I learned a lot of really hard lessons along the way. And I know so much more about myself now than I did then. And thankfully, hopefully, that's all of us all the time as we grow. I used to think that, isn't it funny how as you get older, what seems old, like that number keeps getting pushed back? So when you're a kid, 30 seems like, wow, that is like super grown up. That is a real grown up there. And then when you're like 25, you're like, well, 30's not really that, it's just not that old, really. It's not that much different than like where I am right now. And then you turn 30 and you're like, well, 35 isn't really like that old. And you just keep pushing it back, and it's funny because it's like, I'm 52, right? And I'm like, I feel young. Like, I feel great. I feel like I felt when I was 30. Like, I'm not, except that I know a lot more than I knew when I was 30. But in my body, like in my experience, I really don't feel different. And I think that keeps happening. Like, I remember my dad saying, and my dad died at 96. Even in the last couple of years, he would say, sometimes he would see his reflection in a window and think, who is that old man? And it's like, yeah, dude, that's you. That's you. So I don't know if we're never, it's like, I don't know. I think if you're doing it well, you're just like, age is a number, right? But the good news about that number is, like, the longer you're here on this planet, hopefully the more you learn and the more you grow, and then the more you know about yourself and other people and the way life works and what you want, what you don't want, what's important to you, what isn't important to you. And you start to really value time as the gift that it is. Where, you know how it is when you're young, and youth is wasted on the young, that whole idea. Like, you're not thinking to yourself, like, oh, I just want to like slow things down and really like absorb this moment. And you're 10, you're 12, you're like, great, and when's ice cream? You're fully immersed in the moment. That's one of the great things about kids, is like they could be, beside themselves with upset one moment because like the peas are touching the ketchup, and then they could be like laughing their heads off the next moment. They're I remember like when my kids were that age, it was like being a little bit like being in an asylum. Like you just did not know what was going to happen next, but it was so much fun. It was like some of my favorite years where I'd just be like cooking in the kitchen and suddenly a Jedi would come around the corner. It's awesome. And that's one of the things that like as you get older, you want to relearn that part of just being really present and you know kind of living from moment to moment as best you can, but you start to appreciate the time in a different way, and you start to realize that time is this incredibly valuable asset, and we get a finite amount of it. We don't live to be 508, so it's like you gotta start to think about that more seriously. And I think as we get older, we start to realize like, oh, like, okay, wait, what is middle age? And you start to try to push that number back too. Well, could I live to be 108? Like it's like you don't want to really feel that feeling, but I actually think it's good to feel that feeling. I think it's really good to understand, you know what? I don't know how much time I have here. And so I'm going to definitely try to use it to the best of my ability. And when you're talking about relationships, well, if that is your attitude, so much better. And when I met my husband, I was like post-divorce, I had my kids, I had work that like lights me up, it's very fulfilled. I did want a partner. I've always been that person. I've been a romantic my entire life, heart on my sleeve, just really hoping and waiting to like meet my soulmate. And as I was getting older and it wasn't happening, and particularly like post-divorce, I was just like, wow. And I'm in Los Angeles, and I only know about Los Angeles because that's where I live. So I don't know if it's different in different places. But, once I got back out on the dating scene, I was like, oh man, this is like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this. This is like really, really like a circus is what this is. And I didn't have a lot of energy for this, right? I had 2 little kids. I'm doing the single mom thing. I own a business. I have a full teaching schedule. And oh yeah, I'm trying to write. So I'm like writing till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning most nights, mornings, however you want to look at it. After they were asleep, after the laundry was done, after the house was clean, like that's when I would write. And so, I don't have like time and energy to give to like dodos. Like that just wasn't going to happen. And so the dating app thing, my mom was the one who really wanted me to get back on the, get out there. And she was like, you got to get online. Like that's how it happens now. It's hilarious. And I'm like, Mom, like I cannot do that. And she is the one who said to me, well, I see what your life is. You're with your kids, you go to teach, you might go to like Whole Foods, and then you go home. So where is this happening? How are you going to meet anyone? I'm like, Whole Foods? No. So, she was really like, you've got to put yourself out there. And so eventually I did. And I just had such a different attitude about dating and relationships because I knew more about myself and I knew more about life. But here's the thing that I do, it's like I both wish and don't wish. And I was writing this because, and this is where I get into this time travel conversation. It's like I kind of wish I could go back to my 25-year-old self and be like, hey, you know what? You need to be a lot more discerning about anyone you're going to spend time with. Like, here are some qualities that ought to be non-negotiables for you. And do not waste time on men who want it to be all about them, because that's boring and not inspiring. I used to be really intrigued by narcissists. Like, that was really intriguing to me. And I'm still intrigued. Like, I'm going to tell you that I still find it fascinating. But I find it fascinating in a clinical way, not in a way that like, oh, I want to gravitate toward that. No, I do not. But I used to find it used to feel really familiar. And I would find myself, with people who were incredibly happy, like, oh, great, I'm making it all about me and you're making it all about me. This is great. Yeah, we can do this. It's going to be terrific. I just like that was no longer interesting or compelling to me. I did not want someone who needed to be saved. I didn't want a project. I wanted a partner. I really felt like if I'm going to be with somebody, then they have to be increasing the joy quotient in my life and my kids' lives. I will increase the joy quotient in theirs, but they need to do that. And because I had such a history of not even like thinking about that, or my whole approach just shifted. And instead of kind of leaning forward on a date and showing like how, oh, I'm so loyal and I'm so wonderful and I'm so giving and I'm smart and I'm funny and I'm great, I just sat back. I was just like, okay, wait, I'm just gonna lean back here for a minute and let this person just show me, who they are, and then give me a reason to lean forward. Like, I'm not going to start these dates leaning forward. I'm going to start these dates leaning back. And I don't mean it as a test, or, I just wasn't going to go all in or invest unless there seemed to be a reason to do that. And I had a lot of, like, in the beginning, like first coffees, whatever, was like, oh yeah, no, no, definitely not investing here. And my husband was, he was the guy. Like, I showed up expecting nothing. In fact, I was like, yeah, I just had no expectations except I'll go and I'm sure I'm going to meet someone really nice, because I had that interaction with, the messages that we had shared back and forth, and the fact that he was very thoughtful about like where I lived and finding a place really close to me on a Friday night, and working with the fact that like I was dropping my kids off at a certain time, and he's just like very willing to work with that. And so I knew, like, at the very least, and I knew he was smart and funny and creative. I knew all of that. So that if nothing else, I'll go, we'll have a nice time, and maybe that'll be that. And yet I got there and it was just like, bam. It was just a real like, wow, this was not what I was expecting. I think we met at 7:15 and I didn't head home till like 1:30 in the morning, which was just like a shocker. And we talked the whole time, and it was just really, it was a real surprise. It was not what I was expecting. And that is another thing that I want to say is, you just never know. You never know what's around the corner, or what's going to happen tomorrow, or what might happen later today. You just do not know what adventures may await you. And to, try to remind yourself of that. I do think you have to put yourself out there a little bit if you want that kind of, if you're looking for a partner. But for me, I wasn't just looking for a partner, and I wasn't just looking for companionship or just I was like, if I'm going to be with someone, it has to be like unbelievable. It has to be my person. Like, I don't want to just, fill the time or like that. I'm not looking for that. And I think if you can enter any relationship with that attitude of like, I'm only going to invest time and energy in this if it's amazing. If this person seems like they are going to increase the joy quotient in my life, then I'll invest. Otherwise, no. Like, why? For what? For why? Like, what is the point? I definitely did not need to be in another relationship with someone who was going to suck the energy out of my soul. Like, I did not need that. I had 2 kids who needed me. Definitely going to take care of those 2 human beings with joy, but I did not want a project in a partner. I wanted a man who was going to know how to show up for me and my kids, was going to have something interesting and compelling and exciting of his own to bring to the equation. Was going to be sensitive and like open. Like, I wanted great or nothing. And I really think like everyone could benefit from that attitude. And the reason, I'll just go back to the time travel thing for a minute, that like, as much as I sort of do have these thoughts of like, oh wow, if I could go back in time and just kind of tell my younger self, I wish I could tell my younger self, don't worry about all this so much, like, don't worry, because something amazing is coming down the line a bit, but like, it's coming. Like, don't worry. Because I spent a lot of time just feeling so like heartbroken, or like I was failing at life, because I couldn't figure this thing out, this happy family, like good relationship thing. And I think I would maybe go back and say, like, you know what, sister, like, do not worry. Just try to let it go and trust, like, something great is coming. But, I can't do that. And the reason that I always get into this mind conversation about time travel, not that it's a possibility anyway, but is that I feel like if you went back, right, and you told your younger self some things that you wish you'd known then, you might actually change the course of events and not end up at that exact place where you were at that exact time. You kind of change the timeline. And if I had felt better about myself sooner, like, who knows if I would have the experiences that I've had that have really helped me grow and learn and heal, and that usually when we're going through heartbreaks, as awful as they are, and I don't mean, I'm talking about in terms of relationships, when we go through a heartbreak, usually, like, hopefully we're going to learn and grow from it. Now, I do think that there are certain things that nobody needs as a lesson. Just when people treat each other with no respect, compassion, empathy, understanding after they've been together, like, that is just really, no one needs that. Like, that's not a lesson. That's just, like, crappy behavior. And it's a reflection on the other person, not the person on the receiving end. If someone treats you without, kindness or respect or understanding or communication, like, I do hear from a lot of people who get ghosted, and it's just like, that's like, what? That's just really cowardly. Like, have a conversation, treat somebody with enough respect as another human being to not do that. So I think some heartbreaks are compounded by, like, very just insensitive, disappointing, like, not okay behavior. It's being betrayed, like, those are rough things. But when you go back and you look at, okay, there were red flags, and in what way did I not heed the flag? Can I go back and look at that? I did that, for myself when my first marriage ended. Back and thought, like, okay, wait a second, where did I know that there were red flags, and and I just kept going, like, when did that happen? Let me look at that and try to figure out why. And a part of it, once you have kids, it's a different situation, as anybody in that position will tell you. You're no longer just making decisions that impact you. You're making decisions that impact the people you love more than anything in the entire world. So it's like it becomes really hard to take action on your own behalf sometimes. Generally speaking, if you're in a soul-crushing situation, taking action is going to benefit your kids as well. It's not good for anybody at that point. So yeah, I hope that, this is like a helpful thing to think about and to understand what I would do and what I did do. If you are finding over and over again that, like, when you have relationships, they end in heartbreak, I would take a hiatus and really try to spend some time dating yourself, like loving yourself, being in relationship with yourself, and figuring out, like, am I not putting a value on my own worth and all the gifts that I bring to the table, all the qualities I have that are really special and unique? Like, am I not putting a high enough value on that stuff? And let me just spend some time, dating myself here and figuring that out before I put myself out there, because it'll help you, if you have that realization. And I don't think you have to, like, I was writing about this too. I'm not one of those people who says you've got to love yourself before you can love anyone else. Also, let me just quickly say, attachment styles are malleable. Like, they're not set in stone. And so if you had really insecure attachment, disorganized attachment, you can become somebody with secure attachment. And sometimes an insecurely attached person, being in a relationship with a securely attached person is so healing. It can be really healing. Or two people who have insecure attachment. Now, sometimes that can get really codependent, and you want to watch that so you're not, like, feeling like you've got to always do everything together all the time, or you're not safe and you're not okay. Like, that's not really healthy either. So, you just got to watch, but knowing about attachment styles is really helpful. And just having as much information in your conscious, like at your disposal, is only going to be helpful. And sometimes that hiatus is really where it's at. And any healing that you do for yourself is only going to help you in any relationships that you have, because you're just in a different place. You just are putting a high value on your own well-being. Hopefully, I think you may not have to like love yourself, but I think you have to care about yourself. And I think you have to put a high value on your time and energy, and also recognize that all those things that make you you, like that's such special stuff. That's the special sauce there. Like if we were all the same, life would be really boring. Each one of us, we're all so different and unique. And I mean, a lot of our feelings are really similar, but the way that we're walking around on the earth, it's so interesting. I went to back to school night last night with my kids, and I saw all these teachers, grown adults, right? Adults. And it was just so fascinating, like the way people present things and talk about things. And like some of the teachers were so impassioned. It was like a TED talk. It was like amazing. Actually, like one of the math teachers last night was talking about how math is life, and math is art, and math is literature, and math is with us all the time. And I was like blown back in my seat a little bit, because he was just so incredibly, it was such a profound enthusiasm. And like that, to me, that's like it's gold, right? Like each of us has gold. And so to at least know that about yourself, like there's going to be someone out there, or if you're going to be with someone, you want to find someone who's going to appreciate your gold, your light, your specific stuff. That's what and that you to do that for them too. I think you have to have a certain amount of experience under your belt to really get it, and to celebrate it when you find it. And celebrate it every day, not take it for granted, and not allow yourself to think that you have people pegged. You don't have anybody pegged, because people are changing all the time, every day. So it's a trap if you start to think, oh, I know this person, I don't have to pay attention anymore. I live with them. I know what they're going to say. I don't even need to talk to them about this. Well, you're in trouble. You need to rethink that, like today, right now, because that's how you get into trouble. And the last thought I will leave you with before I close this talk is there's this concept in imago therapy that I love. This is a thought that once I learned about that, it was like it's just one of those moments in time where I was like, oh, that is the stuff right there. And so the idea is that relationships are happening in the space between us. So like my relationship with my husband, it's not in me and it's not in him, it's in the space between us. And I'm responsible for what I put into that space. He's responsible for what he puts in. And we are co-creating this third thing that we call a relationship. And the level of commitment and awareness and understanding about that is the thing, right? Like to be mindful, like what am I contributing to the space between us right now? And by the way, if you live in a house with kids, they're marinating in that space between you as well. They're learning and growing and seeing what a relationship is. And so, just to think, and that's for every relationship in the world though. It's not just romantic relationships. Every relationship that you have in your life, there's you, there's the other person, and there's this third thing that you are co-creating that's happening in the space between you. That's you and your children, that's you and your barista, that's you and the person, who's either cutting you off or letting you merge. There's always a space between you and someone else, and you can only control what you are contributing to that space. And just to give that some thought, make sure you're showing up with the stuff that you want to contribute. I thank you so much. I really do hope this was helpful. As always, if you have questions or comments or anything at all, I'm hopefully pretty easy to find. I certainly try to be, and comments under, and then there'll be the podcast coming out. So